Hi, everyone. My name is Barbara Dillon, Editor-in-Chief of Fanbase Press. In light of the 2023 Writers Guild of America and SAG-AFTRA strikes, we at Fanbase Press not only want to show our solidarity with the striking workers, but we also seek to help educate and inform our community members about why the strikes are happening, their potential impact to you, and how you can get involved. With me today is award-winning screenwriter, playwright, and comic book writer Melody Cooper, a Sundance Episodic Lab Fellow and winner of an Adobe Women at Sundance Fellowship. As a member of the WGA, Melody's work has included the soon-to-be-produced feature adaptation of the best-selling fantasy novel Beasts of Prey, the CW's two-sentence horror stories, Law & Order SVU, Omni Volume 2 with Humanoids, Noir is the New Black, and DC's Milestones of History. Melody is also the co-founder of the group Nyx Horror Collective, which supports women identifying horror writers and filmmakers, and she executive produced the short horror comedy Hide Your Crazy, which has been selected for 5 Oscar-qualifying film festivals this year. Melody, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
It's great to be here.
Melody, you have a wealth of experience as a writer in various entertainment media. What can you tell viewers about when you first became a member, and why was it important for you to join the WGA?
I first became a member when I booked a show called Two Sentence Horror Stories. In 2019, I'd been in the HBO writing program, and out of that program, I got staffed during it on my first show. So it was very exciting. I was living in New York and I moved kind of overnight to LA. And one of the, I wanted to join the union, and I had been an actor in New York. So had been in Equity and SAG-AFTRA. I knew how difficult it was to join the union as a writer. And one of the key things I remember in the job was the person who was the contact for the union in our writers' room was so helpful, and just like getting us like kind of ramped up. And I knew how important it was, one, because of that relationship, and also there's a meeting for new members, and at that membership meeting, we were given a lot of information. And one of the things we were told, and this is something a lot of people hear, but that it's easier to get into on an NFL team than it is to get into WGA. So I knew it was something special just in that way, but also the support for making sure that I was taken care of as a writer in terms of how I was treated in the room, and also how I was paid. And I believed in unions for a while, and so this was just a new step for me in my career.
Absolutely. And you have, in your response, touched on this a little bit already, but just to further expound upon it, how has being a member of the WGA helped you, as you've noted, in your career, but how has it furthered your career, or even how has it benefited you in terms of the health and wellness benefits that it offers to you?
Well, health and wellness is great. Great insofar as when you have it, because it is one of those unions where you have to be making a certain amount of money within a certain allotted time to qualify for the health benefits. And I've been lucky that when I started working, I worked pretty much back to back, and I worked on 3 shows and a film. So that's actually carried me through to 2024 in terms of being covered for insurance. But and the insurance benefits are great. Both dental and health is covered well. The drawback is that you do have to be working, and you do have to make a certain amount to be able to qualify. I forgot what the first part of your question, aside from the health.
In terms of your career, you had touched on it a bit already, but any other elements that have really furthered your ability to pursue your career?
Oh yeah, being in the union, I mean, it's required, for one, if you really want to work as a professional. And then also, as I mentioned, we have captains in WGA captains in our rooms. And, in my first room, there were some, I'll just say, kind of moments that the newer writers just were unsure about how to deal with a situation that came up, and that WGA captain was the perfect person to go to, who understood what the process might be if we needed to move forward that way. And I appreciate that. I have friends who've been in in rooms that were really terrible, and they had a horrible time. And for them, even having the WGA to turn to and as a resource as to what how they should proceed to protect themselves was important.
Absolutely. And with all of this conversation, we do want to educate folks, and it may be challenging for some to understand why the strikes themselves are happening, both the WGA strike and the SAG-AFTRA strike. What would you say to the question of how did we get here?
Well, I think we got here for two reasons. One is I think that and I wanted to make a distinction between when people say producers and streamers and studios, because when we say, oh, angry at producers, a lot of people use that word. The producers that we deal with are great people. The producers can be an independent producer. They're hired just like we are as writers and actors. It's actually the streamers and the companies, the Warner Media and Netflix. That's who we're striking against. And I think to be very honest, I think it's a matter of greed. I think it's a matter of a business model that's changed from the past, where it's about the bottom line on a quarterly basis, which means they're always looking to make a profit over last quarter and not thinking about the holistically about what makes the industry and the business work. So that model doesn't work for what we do as creatives. And so I think that's one of the main issues is that that greed, and also treating the people who create the art, the actors and the writers, as kind of dots of paint and kind of treating us like it's a gig economy. You'll hear that, meaning that we're just kind of plugged in and plugged out, instead of people who are trained and are experienced, who have careers and should be paid accordingly.
I think
And
that's it.
details of that, and there's further details. It's the fact that the companies want to reduce the number of weeks that we're in the room. They want to reduce the number of people in the room. You might have heard mini rooms. So you used to have a room that maybe had 10 people, maybe 8 even, down to like 2 or 3 people, which puts a lot of pressure on the showrunner. Very often what they do, and this has come up as a major issue, is they want to shorten those weeks in the room, which means that you don't get to be on set to produce your episode, which is key. If you want to move forward in your career, you must produce an episode to be able to become a showrunner eventually, or become a supervising producer. And by removing that, from moving writers from the room before your episodes go into production, that's puts much more pressure on the showrunner to revise scripts, to be on set, to do everything. And they burn out. They will burn out. They do. Some of them just, it's really hard. And it should be a collective. You're working as a collective in the writer's room to create the show, and you should be working as a collective to produce the show. So that's, and then we, of course, have the issue of AI. Which you'll hear people say you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Yeah, well, that might be true, but you can also put guardrails on, and it's here to stay. I mean, AI is not going away. What we're really saying is we want there to be parameters, and we don't want it to replace writers. We want to be able to use it as a tool if we want to, but not for it to take the place of writers, and to be used instead, and to scrape our scripts and to create something that's very derivative and terrible, and then put our names on it. And we don't want our names on that, and we don't want it to be used to create scripts. I'm trying to think of what else there. For actors, AI, of course, is. I mean, I can't. When I read that they wanted to use an actor's likeness kind of in perpetuity, the fact that they would even admit that just tells you how they really just don't care.
Exactly.
Anyway.
I think the only other two, because those are solid examples of exactly what is at stake here. I think because of the length of experience that everyone in the WGA is coming to the industry with, things like residuals and the impact of streaming as well. Do you want to speak to either of those?
Well, yeah, we need transparency, first of all, because and residuals. I worked on Law and Order SVU, so that was broadcast shows. So I get residuals, and it was one of the longer seasons as well. We did 18 because it was during COVID instead of the 22. But but when you talk about residuals, you it's for streamers, they don't offer that. What they do is they feel like they pay you upfront really well, which, I've sold a show to Netflix and they do pay you fairly well upfront. But if you have a hit show like Squid Game, the man who created Squid Game, they made billions. He's not making anything right now for a show that's made billions of dollars. So we want transparency so that we know how, they have that list of like for on Netflix, the top 10 shows. Well, if it's a top 10 show, you should be the creative should be getting some skin out of that game, right? Is have some skin in the game for that. So they don't want to make their business transparent for a variety of reasons. I think sometimes part of it is probably because their business isn't as good as they're always letting on. But regardless, the only way for it to be fair is that if a show is doing well, however the show is doing, that we know what the ratings are and how many people are watching it, so that we can be paid accordingly when a show is successful.
All excellent points. Thank you, Melody. To switch tracks a bit, I want to talk about the fact that there are a lot of, let's call them do's and don'ts, when it comes to which kinds of actions striking workers are able to do while the strike is on. Could you explain why these prescriptions are so important for the striking workers?
What's interesting is that shifting, because SAG-AFTRA was giving waivers for interim agreements to allow some independent films to go forward, and they're making a shift to not offer those on a film that has a WGA contract, which makes sense because the reason why we're not allowed to work, as difficult as that is because that is our only leverage, is to control what's in the pipeline. And if the streamers don't have films and TV and scripts in the pipeline, then they've got to turn to us and they've got to negotiate with us, and it gives us leverage to get what we're asking for. And that's really the only leverage we have. So, while it was disappointing that DGA, didn't stand with us, the fact that SAG-AFTRA has put a standstill to production. And so, and that's the only way that we would be able to get them to the table.
That's a really great point. To that extent, and kind of the flipped perspective for our viewers who may be watching, as consumers ourselves, should we be boycotting these companies in solidarity with the striking workers?
That's a good question. I personally, I'll tell you, the WGA line is not yet, and neither of the unions have asked for that yet. But it is kind of tacitly understood that could be on the table if AMPTP doesn't negotiate fairly. And one of the reasons why we don't call for it is because we're trying to keep things, and I understand this, as not too contentious, and to keep the heat down and the rhetoric down, so that we can come to the table and negotiate on these important issues and get to back to work. And we want to work with these companies. We don't want to have it to be too antagonistic, because we have to, get on Zooms with Netflix and hopefully another month or so. But I also think that calling a boycott also means, this is the work we've created, so you're not going to be watching our work. So that's the other aspect. But the content's the shows are beginning to dwindle because they're running out of shows. And it could be something that if we stood together and we asked the public to stand with us, it would put pressure on. So I think it's not completely off the table, and it could be a pressure point. And what's really important is when I go out picketing, I have Leuna, who they offer services on set. We have teachers who are walking with us, IATSE, Teamsters. There are all these unions coming together, and all of those unions have thousands and millions of members who have families and friends. And so if we actually did call for a boycott, it could be really effective now. So the fact that we've waited is good, and hopefully we don't have to do it.
There is one other question I want to ask, and I don't want to hold you to any sort of knowledge base on this. I just want to get your perspective. And I recognize that things are constantly in flux and constantly changing. But we at Fanbase Press, we are content creators, we're a publisher, but we're also a media outlet, and we want to be demonstrating solidarity with our media branch as well. So many of our journalistic fellows and colleagues may also be curious, should we be discussing, reporting on, or reviewing projects from these truck companies?
That's a hard question for me to answer, because there have been different responses that I've heard from different angles. And if anybody, I would say any journalist should contact WGA and SAG-AFTRA to know what the latest is, and what they're what they're asking for. But I think if the work is already done, the work that you're reviewing is work that's pre-strike, and it also includes the work of actors and writers, that have worked really hard to create that work. So I think, I have a show that's premiering September 1st, and it's like, can I promote that? It's like, waited so long for the show to finally get its premiere date, and then they announce it like in the middle of the strike, and now all the actors who worked so hard, and the writers, we don't know, how much we can promote, and we're actually allowed to promote on our own socials, but not use like official trailers from the producers. So there's, I think we can use stills, there's different things, but I'll probably check back with WGA just to make sure, because you just don't want to be caught doing something that they're adamantly against.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Just a few more questions for you, Melody. Thank you so much for your time. We've talked about it a bit, but just to be really clear for our viewers, what is the best way for us to demonstrate our solidarity with the WGA and with SAG-AFTRA?
I think if there's anybody you're talking to who doesn't understand the details, to share some of what I've shared here, so that the more of the general public understands and can support us. And you can support us in if you're in LA, New York, Chicago, a number of cities have picket lines, and actually joining us on the picket line is great, because we've been out here, well, for us it's 107 days for WGA. It's 3 weeks now for SAG, and 3 weeks, I think 4 weeks. So we could use that kind of support. It's always great. I was on one picket line, and something like 50 teachers came with signs, and they just on their lunch hour to come join us on a hot day. And it was great. It was wonderful to have that support. If you go by a picket line, honk loudly. But we also, in terms of, a lot of us, we literally are not working during this time, and some of us have side gigs. But there's something called the Entertainment Community Fund, and that's to help writers and also crew who also aren't able to work right now, to give some kind of financial support. So if you're able to donate to something like that, that's helpful as well.
Excellent. And in addition to the community fund, are there any other resources that you would like to share with viewers that they can learn more about the strike?
You could I would say go to WGA's, just go to their website. They have a strike page. You don't have to be a member to see the information. So you can see if you want to go on a strike. I believe SAG also has that same page. So it's public, and so you can see what the latest is. And I would also say that, there's a lot of entertainment outlets that are pretty close with the producers, AMPTP, and sometimes information is leaked, sometimes it's incomplete. So I would be very careful about taking as gospel anything that you see in the news about negotiations in particular. Wait until there's something official from either from AMPTP, but more likely from WGA or SAG-AFTRA, and that should be listed. You'll see it on the socials and also on the pages, the websites, because then you'll know that that's factual.
Excellent. Well, Melody, thank you so much for all of your time, for all of your wealth of information, and just for your hard work in making and helping the needs of the WGA, SAG-AFTRA to be met. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. Oh, and also one other thing, if you know any people who do reality shows, encourage them to unionize, because that gives us even more leverage. And I was really happy to hear that. My brother does a reality show. He just has a show, The Extraordinary Birder. And I told him, you better unionize, because he'll be treated better, make more money, and it'll help us stand to get, a better contract.
Agreed, 1000%. Well, Melody, again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Sure.